Well, Boris Johnson was actually trying to reach out to some of those rebels on his own benches today, insisting that he wasn't trigger happy about using these powers which would break the international agreement he'd recently signed. It wouldn't be the first thing he goes for. There might even be a vote of parliament. And it looks as though those words he was using did win over some people, or at least make them open to the idea that they won't rebel further down the line, though they may well abstain tonight. But those numbers of rebels really aren't that threatening. It looks as though it's going to be 20-something, something of that order. And on an issue like this, on Brexit, you have to add the DUP to the Conservative column. So the Prime Minister's probably on an issue like this sitting on a majority of about 100 or close to it. So it takes a lot more than that to actually defeat him. We're not in that sort of place. One interesting thing that did happen in the House of Commons today, Ed Miliband stood in for Keir Starmer, who's self-isolating while a member of his family waits for a COVID test result. And he was pretty brutal with the Prime Minister. Here's how the day went here. Ghosts we thought banished are roaming Westminster again. The demonstrators aren't back, but Brexit votes in the Commons are, and other ghosts of the political past are stalking too. All 5 living former Prime Ministers weighed in against the government's plans to break international law. The latest to join in the criticism was also the most caveated.
Well, passing an Act of Parliament and then going on to break an international treaty obligation is the very, very last thing you should contemplate. It should be an absolute final resort. So I do have misgivings about what's being proposed. But I would just make this point. So far what's happened is the government has proposed a law that it might pass or might not pass or might use or might not use, depending on whether certain circumstances do or do not appear.
Ladies and gentlemen, Boris Johnson.
The former Attorney General and Brexiteer Sir Geoffrey Cox wrote in the Times of the government's bill that it was unconscionable that this country, justly famous for its regard for the rule of law around the world, should act in such a way.
United Kingdom Internal Market Bill, second reading.
Boris Johnson changed his plans and decided to come to the Commons in person to defend his actions.
Mr. Speaker, we cannot have a situation where the very boundaries of our country could be dictated by a foreign power or international organisation. No British Prime Minister, no government, no Parliament could ever accept such an imposition.
Another former Attorney General then popped up suggesting members of the government were breaking the ministerial code.
This bill will give ministers overt authority to break international law. Has the position on the ministerial code changed?
No, not in the least. I understand how some people will feel unease over the use of these powers, and I share that sentiment myself. And I want to say to my brother and friend, I have absolutely no desire to use these measures. They are an insurance policy.
The former Labour leader Ed Miliband suggested the Prime Minister hadn't studied the original deal. He'd invented the whole idea of an EU blockade, and the proof was that it wasn't even addressed in the bill.
Now, if the Prime Minister wants to tell us that there's another part of this bill that I haven't noticed that will deal with this supposed threat of the blockade, I'll give way to him. I'll very happily give way to him and tell me, he can tell us. I'm sure he's read it. I'm sure he knows it. I'm sure he knows it in detail because he's a details man. Come on, tell us what clause protects the threat that he says he's worried about GB to Northern Ireland exports. I give way to him.
Well, the right honourable gentleman can't give way unless he's asked to.
There you have it. He didn't read the protocol. He hasn't read the bill. He doesn't know his stuff. He can't blame the judges. He can't blame the civil servants. He can't sack the cabinet secretary again. There's only one person responsible for it, and that's him. This is his deal. It's his mess. It's his failure. For the first time in his life, it's time to take responsibility. It's time to fess up. Either he wasn't straight with the country about the deal in the first place, or he didn't understand it.
It's a great deal for this country. It delivers everything that I wanted when I campaigned for Brexit.
The great deal sold by Boris Johnson now badged ambiguous and contradictory. The government saying the EU is stretching its terms. Even some who are backing the Prime Minister in tonight's vote saying they're doing it through gritted teeth.